The mental model of what eventually became Game B. Social movement that incorporated a set of values but wasn't strictly defined. We came up with some principles that it'd be non-hierarchical, that would be a fundamental value, that it would be network-centric, and that it needed to eventually lead to a social operating system that had long-term metastability, that it could exist for centuries at least.
A new social operating system that's consistent with the limits of our ecosystem, and even more importantly, probably, is congruent with our nature as human beings.
The purpose of Game B is to create a society that we'd actually like to live in and would be proud to leave to our children. Non-hierarchical. It was very strongly a value that traditional top-down command and control organizations were not about what Game B is. Second was net-centric. That, again, fits closely with non-hierarchical, that there would be essentially fractal scale of organization and people intercommunicating with each other as peers. There was one sub-faction that believed changing yourself first was primary. And then there was another faction that believed that creating new institutions, like a better monetary system, better sense-making capabilities, building the piece parts and the institutions versus changing as a person was a vision that started to become clear in May. And actually grew and grew and grew until it eventually was probably the main vision that caused the community to kind of set upon itself. Could exist for centuries at least.
Is congruent with our nature as human beings.
We live in something that we would loosely call Game A, and that we needed to go somewhere called Game B. And basically the idea was there was so little content in that name that it could work almost no matter what our priors were about the situation we live in and the fact that we needed to do something new.
Set of values, but wasn't strictly defined.
Game B is actually fairly easy to define. It is, the virtue of it is that it is not a highly elaborate description of anything. It is a very basic sketch of something. And that what that sketch ought to do is it ought to set in motion many projects. Once people understand what it is that needs to be achieved in order to save humanity from the trajectory that it's currently on, then in principle, anybody can attempt to describe some mechanism that moves in the direction of Game B. Game B is a set of parameters that describes a superior future state, and it can exist at all scales. In other words, if you had an overarching Game B, it would be composed of lots of little Game Bs. The thing to do is not to gather around Game B itself and figure out, who the voices of Game B are. The thing to do is to recognize that Game B is a statement about a design space, and then for people to create initiatives that function inside that design space and attempt to produce either a viable something or other or a kind of knowledge about what doesn't work and why.
Game B is a design specification for a post-civilization human context. It must meet or respond to the breakdown of civilization and provide the necessary and sufficient conditions for a mode of global scale human relationality that at a minimum is not self-extinguishing and ideally has evolvability.
Game B is a new civilization-level social operating system that at least hundreds of millions of people can live in. It's self-organizational rather than top-down, it's network-oriented rather than individualist, it's decentralized rather than centralized, and it's metastable, meaning that it's evolving but not volatile. And finally, it's oriented towards human flourishing, and I would add that it should also be oriented towards the flourishing of non-human life as well.
The point of a game B is not for us to produce a world that will work, it's for somebody to accomplish it. And in some ways, best possible outcome for any individual is for somebody else to figure out how to get us there, because it really takes the pressure off, and it means you get to have the advantages of that wonderful world on the far side.